Delora Kaine was the queen of charm and control, while Jasper Voss was the loyal husband who believed love could survive anything. But when Delora sent Jasper to prison for a crime he didn't commit, she never imagined he'd come back 20 years later, not for forgiveness, but to dismantle the perfect life she built on betrayal. Jasper Velin had never been a man of many words. He was known in Larkridge as the dependable mechanic who fixed cars like magic and never overcharged. People liked him well enough, but he never stood out in any crowd. That was just fine with Jasper. His world was small, and he liked it that way. His garage, his home, and his wife. That was all he needed. Delora Velin, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Where Jasper found comfort in routine, Delora yearned for more. She had always said Larkridge was too small, too slow, too ordinary. Delora had big dreams, and Jasper wasn't one of them. At first, their marriage looked like a perfect balance. Jasper's calm steadiness anchored Delora's ambition. He worked 12 hours a day and handed her his paycheck every week without fail. She decorated their home, joined social clubs, and kept up appearances. But over time, Delora grew restless. She began to view Jasper not as a partner, but as a weight around her neck. She wanted luxury, attention, influence, and she found it in Brennan Kaine, a charismatic attorney who had recently moved into town. Brennan was everything Jasper wasn't: smooth-talking, wealthy, and full of promises. Delora met him at a fundraiser for a local school where she volunteered. Their connection was instant. Within weeks, Delora was sneaking away from home, telling Jasper she was staying late for charity events. In truth, she was slipping into Brennan's high-rise condo, sipping wine and whispering about a future free of her simple, dull husband. One night, after nearly being caught by one of Jasper's co-workers while leaving Brennan's building, Delora made a decision. If she wanted to live the life she felt she deserved, Jasper had to be erased, completely. Not just divorced. That would still leave her with ties to his name, his past, and perhaps even shared property. No, Delora needed Jasper to disappear, in a way that made her look like a victim and him like a monster. She began her plan meticulously. She first stopped being affectionate at home. She needed the story to be believable. She needed to become the fearful, withdrawn wife. She spoke to neighbors in hushed tones, hinting that Jasper had become unpredictable, even violent. She started keeping a journal that she would later turn in as evidence, carefully dated with fictional entries about arguments and threats. All lies, written with deliberate vagueness and trembling handwriting to appear real. 2 months before the setup, she quietly emptied their joint account and opened one under her maiden name. She sold some of Jasper's tools online and kept the cash. Then she bought cheap jewelry and marked it as heirlooms on insurance papers. The final move came on a stormy night when Jasper was working late. Delora waited until the town fell, quiet, and used one of Jasper's old wrenches to break a window from the inside. She scattered some drawers, knocked over a lamp, and slammed her own wrist in a door to create bruises. When Jasper came home, soaked from rain and exhausted, he found 2 police officers already waiting. Delora was crying in the living room, her clothes torn, blood on her lip. She pointed at him and screamed. The officers tackled him, pulled his arms behind his back, and cuffed him without hesitation. In a small town like Larkridge, where law enforcement knew everyone by name, Delora's tears were enough. She told the officers he'd come home drunk, accused her of cheating, and tried to kill her. She said she'd found courage to finally speak out. The jewelry was missing. Her journal backed her story. The broken window, the bruises, everything was staged, perfectly timed. At the police station, Jasper kept repeating that he didn't understand what was happening. He begged them to listen. He asked for Delora. He thought it was all a mistake. But Delora was already in front of the media, giving interviews and telling the town how she survived years of abuse. Her performance was flawless. Her makeup was smudged just enough. Her voice cracked in all the right places. The public rallied around her. Donations flooded in. She became the face of a local domestic violence campaign. She took a job as a community advocate. Women whispered words of support when she passed them in the grocery store. She went from lonely housewife to a town heroine. Jasper sat in court wearing the same suit he wore to their wedding. The prosecutors had everything they needed. The journal painted a clear picture. The bruises were photographed. Delora cried on the witness stand as she described the night she thought she would die. Brennan, working quietly in the background, made sure nothing went wrong. He pulled favors, silenced doubts, and buried anything that could hint at the truth. The jury didn't take long. Jasper was convicted of aggravated assault, attempted homicide, and theft. The judge, known for harsh rulings in domestic violence cases, gave him 20 years without parole. As he was taken away, Jasper stared at Delora. She didn't look at him. Her hand was wrapped around Brennan's arm. She wore a soft smile, not the smile of relief, but of victory. In prison, Jasper became a ghost. The guards called him the quiet one. He didn't speak much. He didn't write letters. He didn't ask for visits. But every single day, he remembered that final look on Delora's face. Every hour, he replayed what she did. And every night, he made the same promise to himself. He wouldn't die in that cell. He would come back. And when he did, she would lose everything. The day Jasper Vellin walked out of prison, there were no cameras, no reporters, no family waiting with open arms. The gates opened, and he stepped into the cold morning air, wearing a suit that no longer fit and shoes that had stiffened from time. He looked older. Yes, greyer, leaner, more weathered, but his eyes had not aged. If anything, they had sharpened. 20 years in a cage had turned them into something unrecognizable. He no longer looked like Jasper. That man had died the night he was dragged from his home in handcuffs. The one who walked free now was someone else entirely. Someone with no attachments, no weaknesses, and no hesitation. He had taken on a new identity before his release, legally changing his name to Damon Voss through a private attorney he'd met in prison. It was easy to do. All it required was patience, paperwork, and a few well-placed contacts who owed him favors. He knew that if he was going to move freely, he couldn't be Jasper anymore. Jasper had been ruined. Damon, however, was a blank slate, a shadow. He didn't return to Larkridge. That place was poisoned, filled with memories and whispers that could trigger rage he couldn't afford. Instead, he rented a room under an alias in a nearby city where no one knew his face. He used cash, worked nights cleaning warehouses, and spent his days digging. Not just any kind of digging, methodical, quiet, surgical digging into the lives of Delora and Delora Kaine. It didn't take long to find them. They had married a year after Jasper was imprisoned. Public records showed they'd bought a massive estate on the outskirts of another town, built with wealth Jasper couldn't begin to comprehend. Delora had rebranded herself as a successful advocate and speaker for domestic violence awareness, while Brennan had risen through the ranks in the legal world. Together, they were a power couple. Untouchable. Worshipped. Damon studied them like prey. He created profiles, made timelines, tracked their investments, their charities, even the schools their children attended. Yes, children. They had two, a daughter named Soraya and a son named Lennox. Beautiful family photos were scattered across magazine articles and social media posts. They painted the image of a life so perfect, it would have been laughable if it wasn't so insulting. Delora smiled in every picture, her arm draped over Brennan, her hands holding their children. Her eyes didn't show guilt, only pride. The more Damon watched, the less human they became to him. He didn't feel pain anymore when he looked at Delora. The old ache of betrayal had hardened into something cold and focused. She had taken his life. 20 years. Gone. Not because of a mistake, not because of bad luck, but because she planned it, because she wanted to live a better life and didn't care what she destroyed in the process. Damon began collecting documents, small things at first, charity tax forms, donor lists, expense reports, all public, all overlooked. He noticed inconsistencies almost immediately. Money was being routed through shell organizations. Grants were being received twice, but reported only once. It wasn't massive fraud, not enough to land on government radar, but it was just the kind of thing that could start a fire if someone struck the right match. He also dug into Brennan's cases. As a defense attorney, Brennan had represented some of the wealthiest and dirtiest clients in the region. Damon found court records, transcripts, and in some cases, sealed documents that weren't as sealed as Brennan thought. He noted the names of witnesses that had vanished, the cases that settled with bribes, the judges who were quietly replaced after suspicious rulings. Brennan's reputation was built on technicalities and leverage, not justice. He wasn't just a liar, he was dangerous. But Damon didn't want revenge that was quick or loud. He wanted silence. He wanted confusion. He wanted them to look over their shoulders and feel what he had felt for 2 decades. So he took his time. Months passed as he constructed the perfect framework for their collapse. He bought burner phones, created fake email addresses, and posed as anonymous whistleblowers. He dropped files to news agencies, reporters, and watchdog groups, never revealing a single detail that could trace back to him. At night, he would drive by their estate, parking far enough not to be seen. The house was enormous, the lawn spotless. He sometimes watched Delora through the windows, walking through the halls, unaware she was already being haunted. On one occasion, he followed her to a gala where she gave a speech about surviving abuse. Her voice trembled in all the right places. Again, her story crafted and rehearsed. The crowd applauded, people cried, and Damon stood at the back of the room in a borrowed suit, clapping with them. He didn't hate her anymore. Hatred was too loud, too messy. What he felt now was purpose, the calm, steady kind that doesn't shake hands or raise its voice, the kind that builds slowly and never stops. He began slipping letters into her mailbox. No return address, no threats, just photos. One showed Jasper the day he was arrested. Another was a copy of her bank transaction from the day she transferred all their joint savings. Each one was a piece of a puzzle only she would understand. Each one a whisper from a man she thought she buried. She told Brennan about them. Damon knew this because Brennan hired a private security team soon after, men who patrolled their property and installed new surveillance equipment. But it wouldn't help. Damon had already seen everything he needed. He didn't need to break into their home. He had already broken into their minds. Damon wasn't rushing. He had waited 20 years. He could wait a little longer. What mattered now wasn't how fast he took them down. It was how completely. The world had forgotten who Jasper Velin was. But soon they would remember. Not his name, not his face, just the ruins he left behind. The first ripple in Delora Kaine's perfect life came subtly. It was an audit request from a minor non-profit regulatory body. Nothing major, just a standard compliance check, or so the letter claimed. But Delora knew enough about optics to understand that even a whisper of financial mismanagement could stain her carefully crafted image. She called her accountant and attorney, both of whom assured her there was nothing to worry about. Still, she felt a tightness in her chest she couldn't shake. Behind the scenes, Damon Voss had orchestrated the audit through a shell organization he had registered under a fake name. He submitted an anonymous complaint packed with just enough detail to spark interest, but not enough to trace it back to him. He knew which stones to flip. All it took was time. While the audit gained momentum, Brennan began receiving curious calls from journalists he didn't know. They inquired about his work defending a particular client accused of laundering cartel money years ago, a case long closed, but now seemingly reopened in the public eye. Brennan brushed it off at first, but when an old photo of him leaving a courthouse with the man was plastered across a digital article questioning ethical misconduct, he knew something had shifted. It wasn't a coincidence. The smear campaign wasn't random. Someone was poking holes in their polished lives. Delora began losing sleep. She started deleting emails, clearing search history, shredding anything that looked remotely incriminating, even if it wasn't. She spent more and more time in her office, obsessively reading news alerts, trying to connect dots that didn't want to be connected. Brennan grew distant, locking himself away with legal files, his temper short and patience thinner than ever. The image of their unity began to quietly fracture behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Damon continued weaving his net tighter. He hacked into an old email Delora had once used, one she had long since abandoned. It still contained traces of her original plan, the forged documents, the correspondence with Brennan before Jasper's arrest, and digital evidence of the affair she once tried so hard to erase. Damon saved everything. He encrypted the files and uploaded them to multiple anonymous cloud drives, ensuring that even if someone tried to stop him, the truth would outlive him. He didn't stop at them. Damon reached out to a woman named Kaylin Murtaugh, a name buried in a decades-old court file from Jasper's trial. She had once been a junior officer, the first on the scene the night Jasper was arrested. She had since left law enforcement and worked as a private investigator. Damon contacted her anonymously, sending her pieces of information about the inconsistencies in Jasper's case. Curious and disturbed by what she saw, Kaylin reopened the case unofficially. She remembered Jasper, quiet, confused, bleeding. The charges had never sat right with her. Now, she began to wonder if she had ignored something, back then out of fear. As Kaylin dug deeper, she uncovered a pattern. Witnesses had gone missing. Evidence had been tampered with. Reports had been rewritten. There was no smoking gun, but the pieces fit too well to be accidental. She didn't know who sent her the documents, but she began to believe the man who had been imprisoned for 20 years had been innocent all along. Elsewhere, Delora's once-growing nonprofit began to shrink. Donors withdrew silently. A partnership with a national foundation was terminated with no explanation. A scheduled interview with a major talk show was suddenly cancelled. She sensed she was being watched, though she never saw anyone. Her assistants whispered when she wasn't in the room. The staff turnover increased. A fog of unease settled around her, and she couldn't escape it. Brennan started drinking more heavily. He snapped during a television interview when asked about one of his past cases. The video went viral, and though his firm tried to do damage control, clients began backing away. His reputation had taken a hit, and in the world of law, reputation was currency. He lashed out at Delora in private, blaming her for their unraveling lives. She, in turn, accused him of letting things spiral. Their once solid marriage was now held together by performance alone. As the pressure mounted, Damon started phase 2 of his plan. He had gained access to the security systems on their estate, not through brute force, but by exploiting an oversight. One of the security installers had posted a photo of the inside panel on social media years earlier. Damon used that to reverse engineer the system's model and found a vulnerability that allowed remote access. He watched them in real time. Their arguments, their paranoia, their children playing in the yard, unaware of the storm surrounding them. He didn't want to hurt the children. They were innocent. But he knew that to truly destroy Delora, he had to dismantle everything she had built, not just her image, but her sense of security, her peace of mind, her illusion of control. He left a note on their kitchen counter one morning. No sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, just a folded piece of paper that read, "Truth always returns." Delora screamed when she saw it. The children were rushed out of the house. Brennan called the police, but there was nothing to investigate. No cameras had been triggered. No alarms went off. But Damon had been there, in their home, close enough to touch the lives that had flourished in his absence. They moved out temporarily, citing safety concerns. But safety was an illusion Damon had already shattered. Delora began to unravel publicly. She cancelled appearances. Her online presence diminished. Whispers of a nervous breakdown circulated among her followers. Brennan's firm placed him on indefinite leave, and internal reviews of his past cases began. Everything was crumbling, just as Damon intended. And yet, he wasn't done. Not yet, because the final act wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Raw, undeniable truth. And it was almost time to share it with the world. Delora sat alone in the corner of her sister's guest house, clutching a glass of untouched wine as though it could offer comfort. Her eyes were sunken, hair undone, and for the first time in years, her phone sat face down, unanswered. The once glittering, public figure had become a ghost of her former self. She hadn't spoken to Brennan in over a week. Their marriage, already fragile, had collapsed entirely under the weight of invisible hands pulling strings she couldn't trace. The news cycle hadn't been kind. Stories of alleged fraud, re-examined court files, and whispers of perjury began to leak online. None of them explicitly named her, but anyone familiar with the original case could read between the lines. Anonymous accounts published damning details. Digital breadcrumbs hinted at a plot against a man who had spent 20 years behind bars for a crime the evidence no longer supported. Damon watched every piece fall into place. He had waited too long to rush now. His message had to be precise. He had already released fragments of the truth, but the final blow needed impact. It couldn't be buried under scandal. It had to scream justice. So, he timed it carefully. One morning, a package arrived at the local newsroom of a regional investigative TV station known for its relentless pursuit of truth. The envelope contained scanned files, screenshots of emails, surveillance captures, and a flash drive labeled, "They knew." The reporters were skeptical at first, but as they opened the contents, they realized they had something explosive. Within days, a special broadcast was announced. The Kaine case reopened, a 20-year lie. The documentary began with the footage of Jasper's arrest in 2005. Then came Kaylin Murtaugh's recorded statement, outlining inconsistencies in police reports, missing timelines, and altered testimonies. The centerpiece, however, was a digitally restored email thread between Delora and Brennan, sent months before Jasper's arrest. It included planning logistics for the planted evidence and legal loopholes to exploit. There was no ambiguity. Delora Kaine had orchestrated her husband's destruction, and Brennan Farrow, a respected attorney, had been her accomplice. The public reaction was immediate. Social media erupted. Hashtags trended. Protesters gathered outside the nonprofit's headquarters, holding signs that read, "Free Jasper Voss," and "Justice delayed is justice denied." The non-profit board resigned en masse. Donors released public statements cutting ties. The FBI reopened Jasper's case officially. Within 48 hours, agents visited Delora's sister's home. She was escorted out, not in cuffs, but under a cloud of suspicion. Cameras captured the moment, and it circulated online within minutes. She had no answers for the reporters shouting questions, only silence. Brennan's arrest came the following morning. He didn't resist. He knew the walls had caved in. His license to practice law was suspended pending further investigation. Meanwhile, Damon released a video message anonymously. His face was never shown, but his voice was clear, calm, controlled. He spoke directly to the public, explaining how one woman's ambition and one man's greed had stolen 2 decades of his life. He detailed the night he was arrested, the confusion, the setup, the betrayal. He said he didn't want pity, only truth. His words ended with a chilling line. "You took my freedom. Now I've taken everything you built with it." Jasper's case was formally overturned within 3 weeks. The courts issued a statement declaring his conviction a result of fraud, false testimony, and malicious prosecution. The media called it one of the worst miscarriages of justice in modern history. But while the world celebrated justice, Damon had no interest in interviews or apologies. He disappeared from public view again, having accomplished his mission. Delora was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. Brennan faced perjury, legal misconduct, and conspiracy charges as well. They were separated in jail, awaiting trial. For Delora, the fall was worse than prison. Her reputation, once untouchable, was now a warning. Her name, once honored, was reduced to a headline. She received letters in jail, none from friends, none from family, only strangers, some mocking, others furious. She read each one like another piece of the life she'd lost. But perhaps the most devastating part was the knowledge that Jasper had never wanted revenge the way she feared. He didn't come at her with threats or violence. He didn't yell, didn't rage. He just dismantled her life piece by piece, truth by truth. In doing so, he forced her to live in the ruins. Her children, now teenagers, refused to visit. They had been shielded from the details. But kids hear whispers, and the whispers had turned into truths. The family they thought they had was built on lies. Delora's sister moved the children in with their paternal grandparents. She never answered Delora's calls again. Brennan tried to cut a plea deal, offering cooperation in exchange for leniency. But it wouldn't help much. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He had built his entire legal career on exploiting the very system he once pledged to protect. As the trial date approached, Delora's attorneys advised her to accept a plea as well. The alternative was a longer sentence and a very public courtroom. Humiliation. She refused, still clinging to the hope that someone, somewhere, would believe her version of events. But no one did. Damon, watching from afar, finally felt something close to closure. He hadn't just survived Delora Kaine. He had undone her. Not with bullets, not with fists, but with patience, calculation, and the one thing she thought she had buried forever: the truth. And now, it was almost time for the world to know who he truly was. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, the air thick with tension, curiosity, and judgment. Reporters lined the back walls with cameras rolling quietly, pens scratching across notepads, as the most anticipated trial in the state's recent history began. Delora Kaine sat silently between her two attorneys, her once elegant posture replaced by a stiff, guarded demeanor. Her eyes, once so expressive in public appearances, now stared ahead, unblinking and vacant. Across the room, Brennan Farrow looked equally defeated, his face pale, his hands clasped tightly on the defense table. The prosecution's case unfolded like a carefully orchestrated performance. Every document, every photograph, every digital file presented to the jury told a clear, irreversible story. The affair, the coordinated plan to have Jasper arrested, the bribed witness, the edited footage, the anonymous tip, engineered by Delora herself, that had brought the police to the garage the night Jasper was taken away. Each time a new piece of evidence was introduced, Delora's shoulders seemed to sink deeper. Her lawyers attempted to counter the narrative, painting her as a woman manipulated by others, confused by her emotions, and consumed by fear. But the evidence was merciless. The jury didn't deliberate long. Guilty. Delora Kaine was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with no chance of parole for at least 18. Brennan received 17 years, a lighter sentence due to his full cooperation and testimony against Delora. His plea deal did little to redeem him in the eyes of the public. As Delora was led from the courtroom, someone in the gallery whispered her name. She turned, instinctively, but saw only unfamiliar faces. None of her family had come, not her children, not even her sister. Her world had become a vacuum, and the silence she now lived in was louder than any verdict. Meanwhile, Jasper Voss walked through the courthouse parking lot with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in decades. He didn't smile. He didn't wave to the journalists trying to grab a quote. He simply walked, a free man, his mission complete. Damon, his real name now publicly restored, didn't return to the life he once had. Too much time had passed. The people who once mattered had moved on, grown older, or passed away. Instead, he chose solitude, settling quietly in a small cabin by the water in a remote town where few knew his name. He took up woodworking, fishing, volunteered at a shelter. Now and then, the quiet helped him breathe again, but he never truly let go of what had been stolen. He would often sit by the lake, watching the water shift under moonlight, remembering the moments just before everything fell apart. Delora's laugh, the warmth of his home, the sound of his children running through the house. It was gone now, all of it, and no amount of justice could bring it back. The children had changed their last names. They refused contact. They had grown up believing their father was a monster. Even after the truth was revealed, the emotional wall remained. Damon didn't blame them. He understood too well how lies, when repeated long enough, take root like trees. He wrote them letters, once every few months, not to ask for anything, just to share stories, memories, pieces of himself they never got to know. He never expected a reply. The act of writing was enough. Years passed. Delora's life inside prison became one of slow erosion. The name Kaine lost all weight. She was no longer a figure of power or influence. She was inmate 54108, sleeping in a cold bunk, eating unseasoned food, and watching time punish her in ways no court could. There were whispers about her case from time to time, especially when new inmates recognized her. Some praised her boldness, others ridiculed her fall from grace. But for the most part, she lived in shadows. Occasionally, she tried to write to her children, hoping they might forgive her. Her letters were never answered. Brennan, serving his time in another facility, never attempted contact again. Whatever relationship they had built on deception was dead. Outside, the world moved on. True crime podcasts covered the Kaine case for years. It became the subject of documentaries, debates, and lectures on legal ethics and power abuse. Law students studied it. Journalists referenced it. And through it all, Damon stayed quiet. Until one day, he agreed to one final interview. It wasn't on television or with a major network. It was for a small, independent filmmaker who had followed the story for years. Damon sat down, older now, his beard grey, his hands marked with calluses from building things with his own two hands. He spoke, slowly, choosing each word like a craftsman carving wood. He talked about betrayal, about the silence of prison, about how hope had almost died in him, but never completely. He described the day he realized he had two choices: let the bitterness eat him alive, or use the truth as a tool. He chose the truth. He ended the interview with something the filmmaker never forgot. He said, "I didn't destroy her life. She built it on lies. All I did was remove the foundation." The video went viral, not because of drama or scandal, but because it showed a man who refused to be defined by vengeance. People finally saw Jasper Voss not as a victim, but as a survivor. And in that quiet cabin by the lake, Damon finally felt what he'd waited 20 years to feel: peace.